Hello, everyone, and welcome to Marketing Roundtable, a brain do podcast. I am Tatiana Kinney-Smith, and I work in design.
I'm Rachel Rhodes, and I work in organic social media. And today we are speaking to 4 guests about AI and automation in their workflows. They are 3 guests within 3 disciplines, and then we will have a special guest at the end.
We'll be covering project management with Ben Ronner, SEO with Ron Sansone, and web development with Andrew Okupinski. And that last guest, oh so special, will be ChatGPT. We will interview AI. We have some hard-hitting questions prepared about digital marketing to really put its feet to the fire.
Right. Special surprise guest is AI itself.
Yes.
But it'll be cool and exciting to see what it says.
And also, we are on Zoom. We're doing our first remote podcast. So if you maybe notice us maybe speaking over each other a little bit more than usual or hopping in, it is because we have that delay. It's really cool to try this as something new and hopefully like expand our capabilities of interviewing people since they don't have to be in the studio with us.
Right, because we do have multiple guests, and we haven't done this since the Halloween episode, which was very fun. I would highly recommend checking out our Halloween episode with multiple guests, but it does allow us to speak to more people for shorter segments and get like a greater overall picture, greater perspective on things. And obviously AI is such a hot button topic right now that it touches every discipline in marketing, or it can if you allow it to. So yeah, that's why we wanted to get as many opinions from as many team members as possible. So our first guest is project manager here at Braindo, Ben Ronner. He loves talking about like how he's using AI and ChatGPT, and he's figured out like so many solutions, and he's worked on so many prompts. He's like definitely, at least in terms of who I have exposure to, like one of the top like AI users at our marketing agency. So we will dive into that interview with him now. Woo team. All right. So big welcome to Ben, project manager. It is Ben's first time on the podcast. Welcome. Hello.
Welcome.
Hello. Long time listener, first time caller.
But we know Ben is like a really
you are.
Yeah. Ben loves ChatGPT.
I do. I think it's great. It's really useful, for the little things.
Yeah. So what are some of the ways that you use AI in your role as project manager?
If I actually counted the percentage of times I would use ChatGPT, the most percentage would be probably actually editing and kind of like fixing grammar and just kind of zhuzhing up my documents. Documents, meaning like emails, actual like contracts, and then also just kind of executive summaries, other things like that. I actually put it into ChatGPT, get it to review it, and just ask it for kind of advice about how to like make it more concise, or where to kind of expand on a little bit, or what could use a little bit more. And it usually gives me pretty good ideas. I mean, I don't go with everything it gives me, but I do use it a lot to kind of just, so sometimes it's nice to just have another set of eyes on it. And I feel like is really great for that, in the sense of like, you already created this thing and you just want to like massage it a little bit. And I feel like ChatGPT is really great at doing that. And then also just kind of drafting basic emails. If you give it all of the email, like the email thread that you have, and then say, give me a response telling this person that I want, X, Y, and Z, even though I don't, I always include myself in the process. It's not like I just like take ChatGPT and just send it out, but it really helps like kind of getting ideas kind of in a row, and just kind of making sure that that it looks good, and that the grammar's correct, and all those little details are kind of finished off. So I really like it for that reason. And then the second reason I use it for is taking notes. It's like a big deal, and there's a lot of different ways to do it. I've actually watched a ton of different videos on YouTube, and read a bunch of different articles about taking notes. I've used Read AI, which is one that you can use through Zoom, which is really interesting. It is actually really, really cool. It's a little pricey, so there is kind of a trade-off there. You have to pay for it, but it is useful. But also it doesn't always kind of do exactly what I want it to do. So
Mm.
what I end up doing is I use Whisper AI, which is part of ChatGPT or OpenAI, and Whisper takes video like this Zoom call necessarily, and you can put it in there, and then it'll kind of produce a transcript, a really high quality transcript where it actually tracks pretty well what people are saying and kind of setting callers or setting up people. And then I take that transcript, and then I put that back into ChatGPT with a special prompt that I
Mm.
create. So after doing a bunch of research on the web and looking at different prompts and testing a ton of different prompts for various meetings, I've come on. I have like my own little copy and paste prompt.
What are some common difficulties you've noticed with AI note-taking programs, like within the notes themselves, like the quality of the result?
Yeah, that's actually why I had to work on the prompt a lot, because I feel like sometimes the what comes out of ChatGPT is a lot of times very superficial. It
Mm.
collects like basic gist of the meeting and ideas, so you can come up with like a okay summary. But if you want like actions, like actual actionable things that you're gonna, next steps, tickets you have to create, things like that. ChatGPT doesn't always catch that kind of nuance. It doesn't always like
Mm.
delineate that. Even if you specifically tell it like, hey, uh I want you know, give me 5 actionable items. It'll give you 5 actionable items, but like sometimes it's repetitive. Sometimes it's actually not really an actionable item. You're just like, we were talking about the weather, and then it's like look up weather, and you're like, wait, this wasn't really this
Yeah.
wasn't really part of the meeting. So, I mean, it
Yeah.
catches like that little nuance if you have the recording of the meeting. So you have to be very careful about like making sure that it actually is giving you quality responses. Also, you have to make sure that I think they call it the heat, if I remember correctly. But there's a setting usually that you could set that allows it to be imaginative. So if the heat, I think it's called heat, index is like 1, that means that you can let it be as imaginative as it wants to be. And unfortunately, that's not really that great for meetings. You don't want
Mm.
GPT to
You
be
don't
imagining things
like
about the
have
meeting.
creative liberties.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So that is kind of, you have to make sure to limit that. So then that way, when it, I usually set it to like 0.1 or 0.2, because during a meeting you don't want it to think about anything or have some ideas. You want it to just be like, hey, these are the facts.
Right.
Um, and also one thing that I found very useful is that before I actually in my prompt, I have it actually write out notes for every 5 minute increment in the recording. So then that way I have like a 5 minute meeting notes that I can just review by myself, and those are pretty concise and correct. So
Mm.
by using that, I think it actually prompts ChatGPT to kind of like use that as a resource to then create those next steps. So if I don't tell it to do that 5 minute meeting note thing, then the next steps will just be all over the place. But if
Mm.
I actually tell it like put every 5 minutes I want a 1 sentence like summary of what happened during that 5 minutes. For some reason, when I do that, then ChatGPT does a way better job. And I think it's because it doesn't really have memory. ChatGPT is ultimately like a inference model. It's basically using statistics to figure out like what would be the next character. So by actually having that in there, I think it's actually prompting it to actually know something in the sense of like for the next steps and things like that.
Right.
Mm.
Like it's already simplified a little bit for it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So have you ever seen experimenting with the, creative liberty option? It can get imaginative. Have you ever seen it like pull in something like maybe from the web, but like it's like so just not relevant to what you're actually talking about?
Oh
That
yeah,
go
definitely.
off the rails?
Yeah. Well, I like using ChatGPT, for instance, like, because I'm a project manager, and for a lot of projects, you have to kind of explain the business case. And then by knowing the business case about something, you also want to make sure that you know the opposite, meaning like you want to know why this is a bad business case. And so a lot of times I'll use ChatGPT for that. I'll be like, give me the business case for, doing paid for this particular term or something like that, right? And then I'll be like, now give me the opposite. Give me the business case against using those terms, against that.
Mm.
And I have to say, when I ask for the business case, it gives me, sometimes it pulls some like random ideas off the web that are like kind of like dated or
Mm.
kind of stale. So it might have worked, let's say in 2016, but not 2024 right now. So realistically, you kind of want something that's fresh. And unfortunately, ChatGPT doesn't really have access to the modern web. It does have, in the sense of like its own internal memory. It does have access to the modern web via searching, but that's not necessarily like going to be kind of where it pulls its data from immediately from its model, you know? So
Yeah,
I, yeah,
I've definitely had it pull like pretty dated things out sometimes when I like ask it something and then like do a little bit of like, fact checking or background, and it's like, whoops, yeah, that was from like when I was in high school, like we're doing like 2013 stuff. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
Always fact check your AI.
Kind of, yeah, yeah. I mean, definitely want to review. Also, I do, I'm also a junior developer, so like I do, basic development stuff. And, the development world and programming languages are evolving at all times. There's constantly like updating packages, things like React, even JavaScript. Right now we're on ES6, but a lot of programs run on ES5. So, and then also a lot of the internet has all this old JavaScript, conversation that ChatGPT has pulled into itself. And so a lot of times it'll come up with a solution, but it'll be a solution that's not really optimized, or
Mm.
potentially using like deprecated functions, where functions that JavaScript themselves said, hey, we're not going to be using this anymore. You're like, and so it'll use stuff like that, and then you're like, oh wait, if you're not a programmer, if you're not like knowledgeable about web development and kind of languages, you can get caught using stuff that's like, all of a sudden you'll be like, wait, I can't even use this on this platform. So you have to be very careful about like the information that it gives you, but at the same time, it's very useful. I mean, it definitely what I call it is, I would think of it as like an aggregator. It really can give you a lot of information very fast, and you can kind of like, if you know what you're doing, you can parse through it. But at the same time, it can lead you astray if you're not careful.
Yeah, it's like it
Yeah.
gives you the block of clay, but like you still have to have the skill to actually like carve out something nice out of it. Yeah,
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Like it gives you like the shape of the human, but then at some
right.
point you have to go in there and be like, okay, time to like actually make eyes,
Right. We know
So like,
how AI is with hands.
This is true.
yeah, yeah. I always,
Yeah.
whenever I see, whenever somebody sends me a photo that looks too clean, I'm always looking for the extra fingers, stuff like that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
Um, and there are like I know like we talked about the note-taking thing a bit, but I also like you mentioned, and from working with you, I know you've done a lot of research and trial and error with like the best note-taking AI solution. Um, with all the different like services and applications popping up surrounding like note-taking and stuff, are there any like kind of indicators or patterns you've noticed that can help a project manager like kind of suss out whether it's a promising program or one that they should just like maybe skip?
Yeah. That's an interesting question. I feel like it's still in its nascent form. So I think like in a year from now, because there's such a demand for it. Like I said,
Mhm.
if you type in note taker on YouTube, Google, even ChatGPT, there's so many like solutions out there. I feel like a lot of them are not so perfect yet. I have to say Read AI is probably the best one I saw so far, just because it actually gives you sentiment analysis as well, which I
Mm,
think is necessary, because I think that's like the missing ingredient for a lot of these note taker apps, is that it doesn't really get like context or nuance.
Mm.
mm,
It'll be very like, I can make a joke and it'll think I'm actually like um being honest or not honest. It'll think I'm actually like, it's facts.
Right. It doesn't understand sarcasm.
mm.
Yes, exactly. So by actually having nuance and actually understanding sentiment, that will actually lead these models, in my opinion, to kind of actually understand what people are actually talking about during the meeting a little bit better, versus just using our words to interpret what we're saying. Like actually, like using my facial expressions or my hand gestures, other things like that will help kind of like guide sentiment analysis. So I feel like, you know, ultimately, what you want to have as a project manager is you want to have something that's useful and that it works, right? Those are the two things. Like, if are you using it on like a daily basis? So for instance, my note taking like prompt that I use, whenever I record a meeting, I always use that one particular prompt. So that's useful. And then does it work? Sometimes it doesn't still. Even the prompt that I have that I feel like is pretty solid and actually does what I want it to do, I still go through the notes and I'm always adding in like actionables, next steps, issues that came up during the call that the AI just kind of missed out on. So I don't really think it's quite there yet. I mean, I think it's very close. And like I said, I think Read AI is very, very like very close in the sense that they have a lot going on for them. But at the same time, I feel like it's probably going to be about another year before there's something like an actual person who's sitting there taking notes and actually like you can lean on it and not worry that it missed something.
right? Like just a how have you like how do you view like the note taking versus like a transcript?
Yeah. I feel like it's usually the same thing. Because usually what they do is most of these AI, what they do is they take a transcript and then they pump it through some kind of filter to take notes. Do you see what I mean? And so like, for myself, I still take notes even during these meetings, even if I'm recording them, just because
Yeah.
I feel like I said I don't want to really miss anything. Also, there's
Right.
always like a few key items during the meeting that like by me taking notes, it's not just about like actually having like a memory of it. It's more about like it forces me to remember. Like I'm just that one of those type of people that like when I take notes, I remember things way better versus if I'm
Right.
just listening.
Yeah.
So, but did that answer your question?
Yeah, yeah. It sounds like so like, it makes a transcript, but then also makes a summary of it for your
Exactly.
notes versus just like putting out a transcript.
Yeah. Also,
Yeah.
just one more thing for your listeners, if they're watching this and they're thinking like, well, it costs money, right? Because you spend on these tokens and things like that. You can actually use Slack. Slack, if you send yourself a recording, Slack actually makes it into a transcript. So if you want to skip the transcript, now I've looked at the Slack transcript and I've looked at the Whisper AI transcript, and you know they're both pretty equal. I mean, it's not perfect, because I mumble. I know I talk very fast, and sometimes also when people are talking over each other, there's issues with that. But so it's pretty good actually. So you could always, if
Yeah.
you wanted to save money, you could always like not use Whisper and just use the $20 a month ChatGPT that doesn't hook up to an API, doesn't create an automation, and then also like I said, and then you could use the transcript that's actually made by Slack. It takes about 5 minutes after you upload to Slack, but it shows up there, and you could always just copy and paste that right into ChatGPT with your prompt and be like,
Yeah.
please
That's a
summarize.
really good idea. Yeah, because the slide transcripts like are pretty good, pretty
Yeah,
reliable.
They
yeah,
are.
they're legit. I've definitely gone through like I put recordings in there, and I've like read through the transcript to find like a point during the meeting where I'm like, okay, well, yeah, this is what we talked about. So
Yeah.
yeah, something useful.
It's not
Definitely
perfect
better.
yet, but nothing is, because I
Yeah,
use Premiere Pro to make transcripts for podcast things, and it can't do brain do. It can't do our name. It's always like brand do, like it autocorrects to something that's not it. But I think
yeah.
we'll get there eventually.
Totally. Yeah, ChatGPT, same thing. For some reason, whenever I like put, and it says brain do, and then like whenever it comes out, like if I put in, for instance, as a project manager, we write a lot of SOWs, statements of work for our clients. And so I have like a version of an SOW that's basically a template, and then I put it in there, and then I ask ChatGPT to fill in from these details. Like I said, I still have to go in and do a bunch of editing afterwards, but it's pretty easy to kind of load it in there. But every time, even though I have brain do as the name, it always changes it into brand do or brand doing or some other kind of like weird
Yeah.
version of it. So
Yeah.
it's not
Using
quite there yet, but it's getting closer. I mean, compared to like you think about ChatGPT, even compared to like a year ago or even 2 years ago, it's exponential. It's not like it's not a linear movement. We're talking like hockey stick here. So 2 years from now, the hockey stick going to be way higher. So I'm excited
Yeah.
for that because I feel like it really like it makes me way more efficient, and actually like I get to focus in on not the boring parts. Like setting up the document and doing all like the tedious tasks. ChatGPT in the end is going to be able to do a lot of that tedium stuff, and then I can just focus in on the kind of intelligent parts where I can kind of like impart the stuff I want to impart into the document or in the email or whatever it's necessary. So,
Hmm.
Yeah.
Right, because AI isn't here to like replace critical thinking or skills or creativity. It's just to help us have more efficient days.
exactly. Yeah. I think of it as just another tool. I think people are scared of it, but I'm like, tools are great, useful. My phone's a tool, right? I mean, even the Zoom call we're on right now is a tool. It's how you use it ultimately.
Mhm.
And if it can make your life easier and you don't have to do like the tedious stuff, some minutia stuff, I'm just like, oh gosh, I have to do this today. But if I get to like get ChatGPT to do like, even let's say 30% of that minutia, well, that's nice. That it cuts,
Yeah.
lets me focus in on the stuff I like to do.
Especially like you mentioned contracts and things like that's such formal language, and it gets into the legal space a bit, like that has to be like correct and fact checked and like that. I hadn't thought about using ChatGPT for like the contracts and other documents like that, but yeah, that makes total sense.
Yeah, exactly. And you have to still go through it. It's not like you said, it's super important that you have to make sure every I is dotted and every T is crossed. But at the same time, like if you can if you have a template and you can put it into something like ChatGPT, and then it uses your template to actually produce that document, then, like I said, it's not perfect, but like I said, if it's doing 30% of the work, which I think it's getting better every day. So at some point it'll be 60%. Then all of a sudden you're more focused in on the kind of more important parts, like actually figuring out the timeline, right? Figuring out the cost, figuring out, the actual scope of hours for this particular contract. You can focus on the more hard parts instead of actually being exhausted by the tedious stuff. So.
Right. Yeah. All right. Well, I think that'll do it for this segment. Thank you so much, Ben, for joining us and sharing like how you use AI and automation in your role as a project manager. It seems like it's really saved you a lot of time, and you've really kind of finessed prompts to do what you want. And you feel like the ChatGPT expert on the team, honestly.
Well, I've been following AI stuff for years, so I love it. It's so fascinating to me. Like, it's just such a kind of cool time to live, that we're get to see this AI emerge in this amazing way. So super excited. Also, thank you so much for having me. This is an awesome podcast, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Cool.
Hi, welcome to the podcast, Andy. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Hello.
So Andy is a web developer at our company, and he's on the podcast before.
That was about a year ago. It was an episode where Tatiana and Andy were both guesting and talking about like two different sides of web development from a design and a development perspective. So that was a really fun episode. You guys can go check that out. That'll be linked above. We did touch on AI a bit then, like towards the end. Andy came out as like a ChatGPT supporter for web development. But yeah, I guess this is the chance to talk about that a little bit, like a dedicated AI web development segment. So how do you use AI and how has it helped you in your work?
Sure. Do I just jump into it?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so old web development, when you had an issue, you usually just write your issue into Google and then copy and paste the top Stack Overflow answer. But ChatGPT has helped a lot in understanding solutions a little better than maybe grabbing some trial and error stuff posted like 6 years ago on a random website. I will say that ChatGPT can be very hit or miss depending on what you're searching for and if you know the terminology to actually get a real answer, which is the same with just trying to search and copy and paste from Stack Overflow. So, each to its own. I think if you want an example of using it recently, I have a personal project I was working on where I was using a JavaScript like package that I'm not really familiar with. This sounds kind of complicated, but it's like, oh, I use JavaScript and then somebody wrote a package to fix this one problem, but there's documentation and troubleshooting to get whatever it is you want to use that package or that solution for. And instead of going through documentation written by people who just did something for, the exercise or fun or to answer something on their own end, I could use ChatGPT and just ask it a specific question and get an answer, which is really helpful. Especially like troubleshooting where something would take me hours of trial and error. I can just ChatGPT and get it fixed in 20 minutes or less, which is a huge benefit.
Oh, like I feel like the common, I guess, situation I've heard of in code is like, oh, like the missing colon or something. Could you just like put your code into ChatGPT and be like, find the bug or like
No.
error? It won't fix it?
No, not exactly. Like missing semicolons, depending on what code editor you have, should just be highlighted. Like I think that was a bigger issue years ago before everybody was using like Virtual Studio Code. That's pretty much what everybody uses now. And as long as you have the right syntax for whatever file you're working in, like missing a semicolon shouldn't be an issue. The more issue is like you get an error and it says there's an error and it doesn't explain why. and you're like, well, that's not helpful. And then you copy and paste that error, and then when you don't find immediately what you're looking for, you paste it into ChatGPT with some context, and it'll help out sometimes. Yeah,
Yeah, what's
Okay.
it's not perfect, but it's a huge tool to help with, especially if nobody you know is familiar with whatever it is you're working in.
Are there any AIs you've used for coding aside from ChatGPT?
No, usually, so people will branch off of like using the OpenAI or like the whatever ChatGPT is built in. There's one that somebody built specifically for WordPress. So it's like a WordPress only ChatGPT, and it might have a little more in depth on like more modern plugins, since like ChatGPT's info can be a little outdated at times.
Mm.
But other than that, no, it's ChatGPT or bust, really. At least for me.
Have you heard of any other tools that like people use or that like you don't like for specific reasons?
Um, Not really. I think when I hear like people who don't like ChatGPT, it's usually because they're doing something that is much, much more advanced, especially with like um I think like data scientists and like very complicated analytics tracking where there's a lot of variables and you're essentially it's not something that's just answered in a manual. Like ChatGPT can just give you some nonsense or in some cases it'll loop info. So it's like it'll give you a solution, you say this solution doesn't work, this is the issue. It'll give you the same solution over and over again, which is like one of the drawbacks of AI where it's like this is right and you're telling it it's not, and it's like, oh well, what about this, and it's giving you the same thing, maybe reworded differently. Those are the big drawbacks. I think ChatGPT, like in terms of like development outside of being like the top tier, which I can't speak on, like general, like it's super helpful if you're just learning coding or you're learning a new language, but you have a background in another one. So you could ask it for specifics in one language and then get a conversion into another language and have it explain each step of that process, which is, insane. That's like something that didn't exist a few years ago. So, people getting into coding now have so many more tools and so much more help that wasn't there in the past.
Yeah.
I think you mentioned that last year when we were talking in the last podcast episode, like being able to translate between the languages and how awesome that is.
Yeah. Yeah, my background is in PHP and front end like HTML and SCSS. So, as I'm like learning more complicated JavaScript, I find myself saying, this is it in PHP. How do I do this in JavaScript? And it's spitting it back and me being able to ask specific questions that I used to only be able to ask another experienced developer for answers for. That's huge.
Yeah. Um, I feel like every design tool we have is like coming out with some sort of like integrated AI feature to like generate designs for you. Like, have you seen that happening in like development spaces? Like, is WordPress like, here's an auto code generator?
Let me think about that. Like the design stuff is really cool, and then there's like, ethical discussions about that because it's like, oh, who's all this work that we're sampling from to give you a solution? Uh, like Midjourney seems really cool, where like there's a Discord and you can just sign up and give it a prompt. Like if Danny DeVito and Donald Trump had a baby that ran for president, you could like it will spit that out, and you'd be like, but it's an impressionist painting or something like that.
Yeah,
I think that
for
stuff's really
funsies.
cool. Yeah, for funsies.
Yeah.
Or, your indie rock album that you really want to convey something. As for development, not really. I mean, there's always been an attempt to sell solutions for problems in development, like websites in a box kind of things like Wix and there's a bunch
Squarespace.
of others. Yeah, Squarespace is the other big one. Um, and they're great if you just want a website. For most people, it works. It's just, if you're trying to market to people or create a solution to something, it doesn't really have that great of answers for those things outside of just a website to put e-commerce stuff online for.
Wow. Yeah, I think that's really interesting because like I feel inundated in every program I use by AI. It's like, no, don't make things. Generate them.
Yeah. So for design, do you feel like that's in a way working backwards and taking away some of the appeal of what you got into design for in the first place?
Um, like sort of. Like I mean, I think I've seen this take kind of everywhere. It's like let's use AI to do the things like we don't want to do, not the things we want to do.
Ah,
And so like sure having like generative like image fill on like Photoshop for like a background or something does like reduce some laborious editing, maybe some really creative clone stamping, some tedious work like that, but like as far as like fully like just make an illustration or write something for me or make the post, that's the sort of like
mhm.
creative labor that can sometimes be hard, but it is like the point. Like I'd much rather spend time making the thing over writing a very tedious and specific prompt to get what I want.
Yeah, gotcha.
Yeah,
Um,
it hardly saves time for creative services, I would say.
mm, that's interesting too, because in development, there's a lot of don't reinvent the wheel, like um, and ideas like open source and things like that, where uh, you answer a problem, you kind of want to give other people who have that problem an answer to it and like build off of each other's work. Um, Whereas in like art, that might be called stealing.
I mean, I feel like that would be more like um a comparison design would be like, okay, like making like a heart like sucks. Making like a parallel, like symmetrical
Yeah.
heart or star or something sucks. So like finding like
Mhm.
a downloadable like vector, great. Like I don't need to
Yeah.
spend time like suffering to make a symmetrical heart. I can build off this existing one. Like that's
Yeah.
the sort of like not reinventing the wheel sort of thing that like, oh, like this works, keep using it. Like, oh, I can use this resource to like expedite things versus like making a finished product out of AI, which maybe people are like, oh, that's like not the point, like a starting point. I think it's a lot easier with like like copywriting or code. Like it's a lot more like editable when you
Mhm.
have um like an image generation, at least in my experience from playing with like Firefly and stuff. It's as much as it tries to like give me lots of options to choose from, it still feels like very out of my control to what the end product is. And once that end product is, it's like you download it, it's like, okay, it's like a flat JPEG. I can't move anything. I can't
Yeah.
like change one color. Like there's no flexibility there, which I find limiting. Um
Yeah, thanks for having me. I really like the podcast. You guys do a great job. Thank you again.
Thanks,
yeah.
Andrew.
Yeah, thanks. This podcast is powered by Burndu, a digital marketing agency that not only provides a diverse mix of digital marketing services, but offers guidance, experience, and true partnership to bring your business to the next level.
This episode is all about AI across disciplines, since we are a multiple discipline team that offers expertise in data analytics, development, paid search, and design, just to name a few. We worked with businesses on every level, from local operations to Fortune 500 companies across a variety of industries.
We have experts to help strategize and execute your digital marketing needs, no matter what step in the process you're at. From wireframes to paid campaigns, we're there for you.
Braindew, experts in everything digital. Reach out today to learn more about how we can help your business grow. So our next guest and our last Braindew human guest is our VP of SEO, Ron Sansone. Hi, Ron.
Hi, Rachel. Hi, Tatiana. Thanks for having me.
Hi, thanks for coming. Ron was our first ever guest on the podcast. Episode 1. We learned a lot of things. Thank you for coming back.
My pleasure.
So I'll say, you've kind of been our AI leader, guru, path maker on like the content team. Always telling us, better ways to make prompts and things that you've learned. So what are some of your top tips you would share for getting what you want out of AI?
Well, Tatiana, I think you queued that up perfectly. The prompt creation is probably the most important part. This might be counterintuitive, but you might actually need to write a little bit more to get the right kind of response out of an AI tool like ChatGPT or Gemini than you'd think you would. I'd recommend a couple things, really. Provide as much detail as possible. Remember the context, like that's absolutely key. You might want to create a scenario, include the context of what you're looking to produce. You can upload relevant documentation. ChatGPT is really great for that. And refine as you go. Remember, you're chatting with an AI chatbot. So make sure it's conversational. You can, if you're getting information back that's not exactly what you want, you can follow up and ask for additional information or refine the actual ask itself. This can get you better answers. I would say refine what you're looking to do for as you go, but also kind of be cognizant of topical drift. One thing you'll see with different AI tools is the longer a chat window is open for, the AI will start to incorporate information from earlier in the chat and start to kind of go off on tangents. So if that happens, I would say open a new window, try again, and be a little bit more specific. My last tip for this too is if you have a really good prompt and it's something that's going to be a reusable, a task that you're going to do multiple times, save that prompt, reuse it for later, and just kind of like make that better as you go too.
Right. We did that. Actually, we had a template that we started using for social things. So
Yeah.
You'll soon have a very deep prompt library if you go that route.
Yeah, those are all good tips. I mean, I'm familiar with, some of them because I work with you, but I kind of like lost sight of the like chatting aspect. Like I'm always like, new window, start over, refine the prompt, but not necessarily like asking a follow-up.
You can even ask more abstract questions like, here's the data that I have. What would you do with this? Is there anything interesting that you can tease out of this? I've done that before with different data sets too, just to try and find out trends and information.
Interesting.
Have you found that there's like a quality of critical or creative thinking when you ask it more open-ended questions?
That is a really good question. I think to a degree. One thing that I use AI for that I think people don't really take as much advantage of is both ChatGPT and Gemini 1.5 can interpret the content of images. So let's say you want to create a series of alt tags for a bunch of images for an article. It can do that. And it will give you pretty creative responses back. That's another one where you really want to have a strong prompt that provides the context of, this could just be woman looking out a window is the alt tag. But if it's, an image that's supporting a medical journal or, an automotive publication or something like that, you want to have that context in there as well too. So I think with respect to creativity, if you provide enough context, you get some interesting responses back. I would also suggest ask for a number of different responses back. I'll say something like provide 20 different alt tag variations or something like that. And then, go through and do a little human intervention and edit accordingly to find the best version and cherry pick what you like.
Right.
So how do you like to use AI in your workflows?
I really hit the ground running with AI when I first started to test it out. There's a lot of really great ways to use it with respect to SEO. The two areas that, I guess there's really three areas that I like to use it for. Analysis, ideation, and summarization. SEO tends to produce a lot of long form documentation. Just last month, I created like a 30+ page technical analysis of a website. If you're a C-suite type, you don't really want to read that much documentation. Something that AI is really, really good for is generating executive summaries, conclusions, next steps. You can feed it an entire document as long as you have a paid account. You don't want to be training an LLM on, client data. It's very good at going through documentation, picking out the main beats, and giving you like a bullet point list. I found that saves a lot of time in long form documentation. And clients have been pretty receptive to it too. It's nice to have just a quick takeaway if you don't have the time to read really dense SEO documentation. On the ideation side too, I've used ChatGPT and Gemini to parse Google Search Console data. It's really great for data analysis. I was able to plop in a ton of Search Console data and output emerging search query trends to create new ideas for here's what you're showing up for. Here are things that you're getting impressions for that maybe you could have stronger content for. The idea is to create net new content rather than that skyscraper content where you're just trying to get the top position for, like a really high volume keyword. So ideation, analysis, and documentation are really the big ones that I use AI for.
You've mentioned ChatGPT and Gemini. Are there any other tools you've tested and really like so far that you see maybe developing in the future and being really great maybe a year from now?
I have looked into, at this point, probably about 70+ different AI tools. Everything from, Jasper AI to, Nightshade, Midjourney. Podcastle has ones for podcasting as well that may be relevant. There's a lot of ones that are pretty decent. There's a lot of ones that have very specific applications. I find myself going back to Gemini a lot. I like the full AI suite in Photar for image work. If you ever need to just quickly remove a background from an image, that's a really great tool for that too. It does image resizing really well as, for small things. And then, Nightshade, Tatiana, you probably know this too. That's great for protecting your artwork from people who are trying to scrape it for AI. There's a lot of tools that I love. Copilot is fantastic too. That's Microsoft's tool. It's integrated within the Bing ad suite as well. GPT for Sheets too is a really great plugin too. If you want to integrate directly from ChatGPT into Google Sheets or Google Docs, that's one way to do it. Gemini also natively integrates to Google Sheets, which is fantastic.
Nice.
Are there then all the different programs that you've looked at, researching different capabilities? Are there any quick red light, green light things you notice when you're evaluating them?
That's a good question. Some of them are a little bit flash in the pan, or too hyper specific. There's a lot of AI video software out there right now. I think if they can give me a good description of what they do, and they don't get too in the weeds, I'm a little bit more confident in it. Meaning, I don't want something that's going to generate video that looks like AI video, like weird hands or something like that. It really depends. You have to kind of dive in fairly deeply to get some of the stuff out of it. And sometimes software has really bad AI integrations. I'm not going to name check specific project management software, but I think a few that don't do it great.
Yeah, it's very like in your face, like try this. And it's more of a hindrance than a help.
Yeah, it seems like every program is adding some sort of AI feature in to various degrees of success.
I think you're going to start seeing some scaling back of that too.
Oh, I hope so.
Yeah, can't
even
wait.
even Google with the generative AI results, they started they started pulling back on that a little bit too. They can tell, it's the clickstream data. They can tell what's not helpful. And sometimes they get it wrong. They'll have a summary and they'll reference something that the information's flat out wrong.
Yeah, very funny memes came out of that.
Yeah, I started, I know I mentioned it earlier when Todd and I were talking. I started ignoring the AI section at the top and just scrolling down to read the Google things because I just couldn't trust it. I couldn't trust what it was saying.
I think that's a pretty common search experience where if you're looking for a very specific information and you're getting this summary up top that's not quite what you need. And Google can tell too, because either you're skipping that or you're refining your search as well.
Nice.
Adding Reddit to the end and just clicking first couple, 3 Reddit posts.
Yep, that's the common solve these days.
Yeah.
Our last question for today is you went to PubCon in Las Vegas and you came back with a lot of new helpful information about AI practices. What were some of your favorite takeaways that you learned?
Oh, how much time do we have? Okay, I'll spare you. I'll give you just maybe 2 or 3 really good ones.
All right.
There's a big change within search that's happened over the last few years, and that's the switch from lexical to semantic search, meaning all of our SEO tools, they're focused on the keyword and targeting that keyword so you can rank for it. That's not how Google works. That's not how any of these search engines work. Behind this technology right now is what we would call vector embedding. In layman's terms, vector embedding is like mathematical representation of words to kind of hone in on what the topic actually is. You want to understand the semantic and contextual relationships between the query and what the person's actually looking for. The tools we have now aren't great for that. The best tool I found so far is InLinks has an entity analyzer tool that kind of show you like topically what a specific URL may be about. So Marie Haynes in her masterclass presentation really went very deep into AI and vector embedding. And you can use Gemini and ChatGPT to kind of figure out what content is about. This is really, really good for competitive analysis. You can identify what the relevant entities are for a specific competitor that's beating you in the SERPs. You can use that to identify topics not covered by the competitor. So that's that net new content again. There's other things that are really great for that too. Code interpretation too. If you don't know why something's ranking and you can't see it within the text, you can't see it within, the linking relationships, you can look at the code and see if is there something that's just better here. That's really great to see. It's important to remember too, Google's employed AI as part of its process for almost a decade, about 9 years now, since 2015, starting with RankBrain, which is their machine learning algorithm. So AI may be new to a lot of people. It's not new to search. It's always been there. Well, at least for the last decade or so. The other 2 things that I'll share that were great. Dale Bertrand gave a really great presentation on prompt engineering. He recommends, layered prompts. This is a lot of what I'd mentioned up top. Provide scenarios, supporting documents, examples, and that's going to get you better results. So if you're looking to write an article, for example, you can use that to generate an outline. I would say if you're trying to get AI to write your article for you, maybe not the best move.
Right.
You can get it to sketch out different sections if you go section by section and then, edit that,
Right.
edit that as a human would. You don't want to be guilty of plagiarism or generating really low value AI content. The last thing, this is a little trick that I like to employ for client work too. We have Google's helpful content guidelines. You can feed that into ChatGPT and use that as a lens through which to you can make sure that your content is properly optimized or adhering to Google's guidelines. I'll tend to do that with clients' content style guide and Google's guidelines to make sure, okay, we're on brand and we're compliant with what Google's looking for. Yeah, those are maybe the two biggest things. The other piece of that is Marty Weintraub from Aim Clear created what he called the AI BS limiter prompt. So if you've used AI to produce content, it tends to add in a lot of filler language. He designed this prompt specifically to remove all of that.
Nice.
So,
Ooh.
I'll share that with you later. I refined that a little bit further too, just to get more mileage out of it after I noticed some additional odd word choices that ChatGPT likes to use. But it's great. It's great for that kind of documentation cleanup. I would also suggest if you're using AI to generate some content, in addition to having a human eye edit the thing, make sure to use a plagiarism checker. AI pulls from a lot of different sources. There are AI generated content checkers. Plagiarism checkers tend to be a little bit more thorough because you can kind of, once you've gotten the AI BS out of there, you can check to see, okay, is this pulling substantially from something that's already existing?
Is there like a free one you could recommend that would be easy for like any client to use?
I would suggest you Google that.
Okay. Or ask ChatGPT.
You could ask ChatGPT. It's also really great for recipes too.
Nice.
Yeah, I have heard of that. It had some fun suggestions. We were having a lull the other day. It was like, what to do with kids' artwork. Really? Put it on the refrigerator? I don't know.
That was my first thought.
Yeah. All right, that was supposed to be our last question, but I did remember my question I was gonna ask here.
Okay.
Have you noticed, just like within your own account, since you're like logged into it, that ChatGPT has been like learning and providing better results to your specifications that you often use?
That's a I hadn't really thought about that. I suppose it has gotten a bit better too. You can personalize it as well. You can provide a little bit of information in terms of like your profile and background that can help provide better answers. I think there may be a bit of a back and forth there of I'm getting better responses because I've learned how to work with the AI a little bit better, but also, it does have the history of my previous prompts to go off of. So I think it's a nice little feedback loop of my prompts getting better and ChatGPT providing better answers as a result of that. We're sort of the AI is training me a little bit as much as I'm training it.
A symbiotic relationship.
Heading into the
Cool.
cyborg era.
Yeah.
All right. Is there anything else you'd like to share?
I just think it's a really good time to test out AI. See if there's anything that feels good to you. There's a lot of great tools out there like Claude AI, Content at Scale is a really great tool as well. Jasper AI, I think I mentioned as well. We're really at the beginning stage of different AI software and tools. They're only going to get better as time goes on. So now's a good time to learn the language of how to communicate with AI so that you're not left in the dust later on when things are even more sophisticated.
Yeah, that's a good point. I actually prefer Claude AI for competitive analysis compared to ChatGPT, for social at least.
Oh, great. I'd love to see how you use it.
Yeah, I'll have to pull that up. Yeah. So thank you so much for joining us to kind of share how you're using AI in the world of SEO.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Yes. Thank you, Ron. Now for our final guest, the star of the episode, AI itself, or more specifically, ChatGPT 4.0. Rachel and I are going to ask ChatGPT questions about topics from all of our fields. Brandon will be responding as ChatGPT. After, we will all have a conversation as ourselves about what we think of the answers and advice we received.
Very excited to see what it comes up with. I am filling in for the role of a lifetime right now, so I'll do my best to channel my inner AI voice.
Nice.
Nice. Don't do it in a robot voice though, please.
No,
I was hoping for a robot voice.
not British. I mean, maybe British. I don't know. We'll
Not
see.
robots aren't inherently British.
No, but it would sound nice, you know?
So
All right.
I wanted to get super specific, and spoiler alert, this is going to give us a very long answer, but provide a brief social media plan for a goat farm interested in increasing their content creation and posting cadence for Instagram. They are very busy on the farm and spend the weekends selling goat cheese at local farmers markets. So content creation and time in general have been the two greatest and most consistent struggles. They do have a young son who is social media savvy and willing to help. What can he do to help his parents' goat farm increase their content creation and posting cadence? Be specific to the pain points and opportunity of the above scenario. It's giving SAT question.
Yeah, I was gonna say just like some commentary on like the prompt before we actually get the answer. It's like, yes, this is giving word problem. My using ChatGPT, I find that like I tend to have more success when I write out these very long things that no longer sound human at all. But it's also not how you like speak as like a layman's person. So it's interesting to like see that this is a very like human forward kind of question or communication style, because like we're talking about communicating with like a human versus like a program.
Right.
It's interesting to see what it does. It's really thinking on this one.
Yep.
Thinking.
Social media plan for a goat farm on Instagram.
Wow, we have a lot to dissect here.
Right.
Yeah.
GPT/Brandon, you're up.
So, social media plan for a goat farm on Instagram. Goals: increase content creation and posting frequency. Number 2 is engage with the local communities and customers. And 3 is to promote products in the weekend farmers market presence. Some pain points you might run into is the lack of time due to a busy farm activities and weekend markets, along with limited resources for content creation. However, you have some opportunities by leveraging the social media savvy son for content creation and management, and showcasing the unique aspects of the goat farm and its products. So let's get into the plan. Weekly content themes: Monday, meet the goats. Wednesday, farm life. Friday is cheese day. I'm sure everybody's new future favorite day. And last but not least, the weekend will be market days. Some daily content cadence. Aim for at least 3 posts per week to start. Utilize Instagram stories for a more spontaneous and less polished content, and schedule posts in advance to maintain consistency. So let's get into the action plan. Content creation. Young son's role is going to be both photography and videography, editing, and content scheduling. The parent's role is going to be providing content ideas and the weekend market content. Engagement: respond to comments and messages promptly, engage with local community posts and farmers market accounts, and encourage customers to tag the farm in their posts for reposting user-generated content. Efficiency tips: batch the content creation, utilize Instagram features, and leverage hashtags. And last but not least, monitoring and adjustments. Track engagement metrics like comments, shares, and new follows. Adjust content strategies based on what performs well, and review insights monthly to refine the posting schedule and content themes. By involving the son in content creation and management, the goat farm can maintain a consistent Instagram presence, effectively engage with the local community, and showcase their unique offerings despite their busy schedule.
Thank you, Brandon/ChatGPT. So this prompt was written very much from the perspective of like a small or local business owner that like really doesn't have the time or money to hire a professional consultant, etc. I think this is a really phenomenal response to the prompt. It reviewed the goals, the pain points, the opportunities. It gave you a plan. It gave you, batch your content. I think that was a really great tip to include. This is kind of a fully fleshed out strategy. Of course, if you were to actually talk to a consultant, you might like audit their account. There would be like more specifics. You would have more nuance and context. But for the prompt given, I think this is really robust, and I can totally see you know, a small family business taking something like this and really kind of getting some good mileage out of it. It's at least a very good start for if they want to start a new Instagram account or kind of refresh one that exists. I think this is a really fantastic start, truly.
Yeah, I was actually surprised. Speaking to like before we prepared, the first time I generated this, I thought the answer was a lot worse. It was very different. It did not provide the same information in it. Something it did also have was like a plan with like kind of like example content schedule, kind of similar to this like Monday, Wednesday, Friday, but it was like every day of the week had a hashtag name. It was like Mondays, hashtag Munchie Monday, Tuesday, hashtag blah blah Tuesday. And a lot of them, like Throwback Thursday, it's obviously one people really know, but I was like, oh, it's literally saying just like do these different posts on these assigned days, and this is what they are, and they were quite specific. Like Munchie Monday was a video of you feeding a goat, and that was it.
That is interesting that the responses can be so different.
Yeah. I think this is like a much better strategy, and it gives a lot more like room and examples. Like Cheese Day, it's like cheese products, recipes, customer testimonials. Like these are like great and engaging. Munchie Monday was kind of my favorite, which is why I remember it. But the other ones I remember feeling like reading them and thinking they sounded really forced. They kind of gave a dated format based on the trends when it was like very popular to do like Flashback Friday, Throwback Thursday, which was very like, I don't know, 2018, 2016. And also creating custom hashtags for each of them and presenting them as hashtags wasn't like great for discoverability. Like, what was the function of them being hashtags? I don't know. So that's like, wow, like what a lens. It's like also my account literally minutes ago, we got very different answers. I would say that they were like of different quality as well.
Yeah, I mean, to build off of that, I'm just looking over Meet the Goats for Monday and Cheese Friday, as I mentioned while reading the prompt. Like, already, those are two pieces of content that I personally would love to see, right? Like, these are very surprisingly good prompts that I was not expecting. So, good stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, you know, if you don't like an answer you get the first time, if you either put in the same prompt or you just reword it slightly, or if you literally, I've done this before, if you just type try again or try again, focus on blank, you will always get different responses and you can kind of mix and match and choose what feels most relevant to you.
Yeah. So, wow, what a lesson. Um, I'm just like so surprised and happy, very happy surprised with ChatGPT's response on this one.
Yeah, it's really good, honestly.
All right, we're gonna get into some design questions now. So, how do you recommend small business owners leverage AI for design assets? All
All
right,
right.
it's finished. I think it's getting tired though. You know, it's like the font flashing in size as it loads.
All right, so leveraging AI for design assets can be a game changer for small business owners. Here are some strategies to effectively integrate AI into your design processes. Number one is graphic design automation. Number two is content creation. Three is personalization. Four is image and video editing. Five is social media management. Six is customer experience, led by design consistency, and last but not least, market research and trend analysis. By integrating these AI tools and strategies, small business owners can streamline their design processes, enhance creativity, and maintain a competitive edge.
All right. So I think it is worth, mentioning we're not reading it all in depth, but the sub bullets provide examples of tools to accomplish these things. Um, I don't know. I feel like I was kind of trick questioning AI in that I was like, like here's a very vague question about like using AI. Granted, it's like for small business owners, but we're interviewing AI, so answers on the table. And yeah, I don't know. I was hoping for some of these things that would be like maybe a little bit more specific
Mm-hmm.
ways to use AI beyond just use AI to make everything. Like if I were to give an example, I mean, this isn't design specific, but you know, like, oh, use AI to do a quick grammar check on the content you wrote. That was like the first thing I thought of, even though that wasn't design. Like it's more specific and instructional, without it just being like AI makes it. A lot of these are just like, oh, use automation, use AI generators, like AI logo generators. I feel like that's like really risky to have your logo be AI generated. Um, it does also go out into a lot of other things though. Like I did ask specifically for design assets in the top section, and it goes into content creation. It goes for like content drafts. It goes into personalization for customer segments and um, writing content generation for emails and websites, as well as social media management, customer experience help, and market research and trend analysis. Like all of those really don't need to be included. I think this kind of links back to what I was saying earlier. Like AI, I feel like it needs to like learn to edit itself some. Like, are these relevant? I don't think so. Um, Maybe it's thrown by the term design assets, but also like that is like a pretty basic term, I think, to use. Like how else would you describe kind of these basic visual things? Um, I do see like here in design consistency, ensure brand consistency across all design assets using AI tools like Frontify or Binder, which help manage brand guidelines and asset libraries. Um, I don't use Frontify a lot. I have used it, I guess it was a bit ago. But as far as I know, it's mostly like a library tool where you like input all the information and then you can like go back and find it, like an internal documentation tool. Um, I'm not familiar with their AI like assets or section, I guess, but I'm also kind of surprised that they're presenting something that I think is primarily like a logging and library tool as an AI tool. Instead of just a website where you save your information. So that's interesting. And it does make me kind of wonder about some of the other tools that it's mentioning, how accurate it is in representing them as like fully AI, like generative or supported sort of softwares.
Yeah, it feels like
Yeah.
it lost the plot a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. I do think it's really cool how many different AIs it points out in this. Like there's no kind of going back to our first prompt, I believe, was there's no like bias with it. It's not kind of saying, or from my understanding, putting forth other products made by OpenAI. It's just kind of like, here's all the products on the market. Explore
Yeah,
whatever you do. There's no kind of bias behind that. So I think that's cool.
that is nice. And I will say for the audio listeners, I am starting a new window every time we do a question. So there's no drift happening here. Yeah, thank you everyone for joining us for this episode. I hope you enjoyed it, had some fun with our different discipline experts and also our fun little like interview with ChatGPT exercise. I had fun.
Blast.
Yeah. Yeah. So thanks, Brandon, for playing the role of ChatGPT as well.
Anytime.
So if you're interested in any of the disciplines that we covered in this episode or some of our other marketing disciplines, because we do have more, you can find us and all of our information on brain.do. That is our website. You can also connect with us on LinkedIn at brain.do, follow us on Instagram at brain.do. And if you're interested in any other social platforms, they're probably all also brain.do. So thank you guys so much for watching, and we will see you next time at
The round table.
Oh.